Story 1. The House on Willow Street. I know you're having trouble falling asleep tonight. That's why I'm here. To keep you company and tell you something that will make you wonder about what really goes on in the dark. This story is real. It happened in a small town in the USA, on a quiet street called Willow. The house stood empty for years, until one family decided to make it their new home. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside. The Johnson family, Tom, Kathy, and their 2 kids, Mia and Jack, thought it was the perfect house. Big enough for everyone, with a large backyard and a cozy porch. It seemed peaceful, but from the moment they moved in, something felt wrong. It started on the very first night. As they unpacked their things, strange noises filled the house. Doors creaked, floors groaned, and every now and then, they all felt a cold chill that made the hair on their necks stand up. "It's just an old house," Kathy said, trying to calm everyone down. But Mia, the eldest, felt it the most. She felt like someone or something was watching her. Over the next few days, the strange happenings got worse. Jack, the youngest, was the first to notice that the lights flickered for no reason. At night, footsteps echoed in the hallway, but when they checked, no one was there. And then there were the whispers, low, soft voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Mia swore she could hear them calling her name. One night, as they were having dinner, the front door slammed shut on its own. Tom jumped up to check, but found the door locked, just as he had left it. "Maybe the wind," he muttered, but there was no breeze that night. The kids began having nightmares. Jack woke up in a cold sweat, saying he saw someone standing at the foot of his bed. But every time he turned on the light, no one was there. Kathy and Tom dismissed it as a bad dream, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then one evening, as Kathy was preparing dinner, she heard a loud bang from upstairs. She ran up, thinking one of the kids had fallen. But when she opened the door to Jack's room, she found him sitting on his bed, staring at the closet. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, rushing to his side. Jack pointed at the closet. The door, it opened by itself. "And there were eyes, Mom. I saw them. They were glowing." Kathy tried to reassure him, but deep down, she felt a chill run down her spine. The closet door was closed now, but something felt off. She pulled Jack into her arms, whispering, "It's okay, sweetie. It's just your imagination." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Kathy heard it. The sound of footsteps slowly walking up the stairs. She lay still in bed, her heart racing. Tom was fast asleep beside her. She listened closely, the steps getting louder, closer. Finally, she sat up, her breath shallow. The footsteps stopped right outside their bedroom door. Kathy sat frozen in bed, staring at the door. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence was even worse. It was as if someone or something was standing just outside listening. She didn't want to wake Tom, but the fear was overwhelming. Slowly, she reached out, shook his arm, and whispered, "Tom, wake up." Tom groaned and opened his eyes. "What is it?" "Listen," Kathy whispered, her voice trembling. But now, there was nothing. The footsteps were gone, replaced by an eerie quiet that filled the room. Tom sighed, still half asleep. "It's probably just the house settling," he muttered, rolling over. Kathy didn't argue. She wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew something was wrong with this house. The next morning, Mia and Jack both complained about strange dreams. Mia said she heard voices calling her name, telling her to leave. Jack couldn't stop talking about the eyes he saw in his closet again. "They were there, Mom. I swear," he insisted. Tom dismissed it, telling them they were just adjusting to the new house. But Kathy couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. That evening after dinner, she decided to do some research about the house. Sitting at her laptop, Kathy typed Willow Street house history into the search engine. What she found made her blood run cold. Years ago, a family had lived in this house. The Smiths, a couple with 2 children. But something strange had happened. According to the reports, the Smith family vanished without a trace one night. No one knew where they went or what happened to them. There were rumors of hauntings, of strange noises, but nothing concrete. The house had stood empty ever since, until they moved in. Kathy sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. The Smith family had lived in the exact same rooms where her family now slept. Could they still be here? Were they the ones making the noises, whispering in the night? That night, Kathy couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind made her jump. She kept thinking about the Smith family, wondering if they were trying to send a message, trying to warn them. Around midnight, just as she was drifting off, the whispers started again. This time, they were louder, clearer. "Get out, leave now." Kathy sat up, heart pounding. The voice sounded like it was right next to her. She turned on the light, but the room was empty. She knew she wasn't imagining it. She had heard it. In the morning, Kathy told Tom what she had found. "We need to leave this house, Tom. Something's wrong here. I can feel it." Tom looked skeptical, but agreed to have the house checked out. That day, they called a paranormal investigator, a man named Greg, who had experience with haunted houses. He arrived in the evening with equipment and cameras, ready to find out what was going on. As night fell, Greg set up his gear, placing cameras in every room and sensors near the closets and hallways. "This house has a lot of history," Greg said, looking around. "But don't worry, we'll figure out what's going on here." Hours passed, and at first, everything seemed quiet. But just after midnight, the temperature in the house dropped suddenly. The sensors started beeping, and one of the cameras in Jack's room picked up movement. A shadow moving across the wall, even though no one was in the room. Greg's face grew serious as he watched the monitors. "There's definitely something here," he said, his voice low. "It's not friendly." Greg's words echoed in Kathy's mind, sending a cold chill down her spine. "It's not friendly." She looked at Tom, who had gone pale, and then at Mia and Jack, who sat huddled on the couch, their wide eyes fixed on the monitor. They all felt it now. The house wasn't just haunted. It was angry. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Tom said, trying to sound calm, but his voice wavered. "Maybe it's just, I don't know, something explainable." Greg shook his head. "I've seen this before. Whatever's here, it's attached to this place, and it doesn't want you here." The words hung heavy in the air. Kathy felt a lump rise in her throat. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg took a deep breath, looking at his equipment. "We need to find out what it wants. Sometimes spirits have unfinished business. They'll do whatever they can to make the living leave until their message is heard." Kathy glanced at the kids, her heart breaking. This was supposed to be their home, a fresh start. But now it felt like a trap. "Do you think it's the Smith family? The ones who disappeared?" Greg rubbed his chin. "Maybe. It's hard to say without more evidence. But whatever happened to them, it's clear they didn't leave willingly." As they talked, a loud bang echoed from upstairs. Everyone froze. The sound was followed by another, then another, like footsteps stomping through the halls. "They're here," Greg said, grabbing his flashlight. "Stay close." The family huddled together as Greg led them upstairs. The air grew colder with each step, and Kathy felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The hallway was dimly lit, shadows dancing along the walls. Greg pointed his flashlight at the source of the noise, Jack's room. The door was open, swinging gently on its hinges. Inside, the closet door was wide open, and the air was thick with an icy chill. "Stay back," Greg said, stepping into the room. He aimed his flashlight at the closet, and for a brief moment everyone saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, staring back at them from the darkness. Mia screamed, grabbing onto her mother as Jack hid behind Tom. Kathy's heart raced as the eyes disappeared into the shadows. "What was that?" Kathy gasped. "It's trying to make contact," Greg said, his voice steady but tense. "But we need to find out what it wants before it hurts anyone." Suddenly, the whispering started again, louder this time, filling the room. The voices were clearer, like they were standing right next to them. "Get out. You don't belong here. Leave now." Kathy felt a cold breath on the back of her neck, and she spun around, but no one was there. "We need to go," she cried, pulling Jack toward the door. Greg didn't move. "Wait, listen. There's something else." He turned up the volume on his recording device, and underneath the whispers, a faint voice spoke. "Help us, we're trapped." Kathy froze. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Greg nodded, his face serious. "It's them, the Smith family. They're trapped here, in this house, and they want out." Tom stepped forward, his fists clenched. "How do we help them?" Before Greg could answer, the temperature dropped even lower and the lights flickered. The floorboards creaked under unseen footsteps, and the whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Help us! Don't leave us!" Greg looked around the room, his eyes wide. "They're trying to communicate. They don't want to hurt you. They need your help to move on." Kathy's heart pounded. "How do we help them?" "We have to confront whatever's holding them here," Greg said, his voice grave. "There's something darker in this house, something keeping them from leaving." Suddenly, the closet door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the lights went out completely. The room plunged into darkness, and Kathy could hear Mia and Jack sobbing quietly, terrified. In the pitch black, Greg's voice rang out. "Everyone, stay calm. We'll get through this." Kathy clung to her children, her own fear rising. "What do we do now?" Greg's voice was firm, steady. "We confront it. We face whatever's here, and we set them free." The room was pitch black, and the air felt thick with an oppressive weight. Kathy held on to Mia and Jack tightly, her heart racing. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was suffocating. Tom stood beside Greg, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the darkness. Greg took a deep breath. "Whatever's holding the Smith family here, it's powerful. We need to draw it out, make it show itself." Kathy's voice trembled as she spoke. "How do we do that?" Greg turned to face them, his face barely visible in the dim glow of the flashlight. "We need to show it that we're not afraid. Spirits feed off fear. If we stand our ground, it will be forced to reveal itself." Kathy swallowed hard, unsure she could be as brave as Greg was asking her to be. She looked down at Mia and Jack, their terrified faces staring back at her. She knew she had to do this for them. "Okay," Kathy said. her voice barely a whisper. "What do we need to do?" Greg moved toward the center of the room, his flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. "We need to make it clear that we're not leaving, that we want to help the Smith family. If we stand strong, it will show itself." Tom nodded, stepping forward to stand beside Greg. Kathy followed, pulling Mia and Jack along with her. They all stood together in the middle of the room, the darkness pressing in around them. Greg raised his voice, speaking into the emptiness. "We know you're here. We know you're keeping the Smith family trapped. We're not afraid of you." For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, eerily quiet. But then, the temperature dropped again and a low, guttural growl echoed through the house. Kathy felt a shiver run down her spine. Greg didn't back down. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice strong. "We're not leaving until you let them go." Suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. It was large, darker than the rest of the room, and it seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The shadow grew larger, stretching across the walls, until it seemed to envelop the entire room. Mia whimpered, clutching Kathy's arm. "Mom, what is that?" Kathy's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to be okay." The shadow moved closer, its presence overwhelming. Kathy could feel its hatred, its anger, pressing down on them. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Greg stood tall, his voice unwavering. "You have no power over us. We're here to help the Smith family, and we won't leave until you release them." The growl grew louder, filling the room with a menacing vibration. The walls seemed to tremble, and the floor beneath them creaked ominously. Kathy felt a wave of fear wash over her, but she refused to let it control her. She squeezed Mia and Jack's hands, whispering softly, "We're going to be okay. Just stay close." The shadow moved closer still, until it was right in front of them. For a moment, Kathy thought it would engulf them, swallow them whole. But then it stopped. Greg's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Release them. Let them move on." There was a pause, a tense silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, the shadow began to recede, slowly at first, but then faster, until it was gone, sucked back into the darkness from which it had come. The room was still again, but the oppressive weight was gone. The air felt lighter, and the cold chill had lifted. Kathy looked around, her heart still racing. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg nodded, lowering his flashlight. "I think so. Whatever was holding the Smith family here is gone now." Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "So, they're free?" Greg smiled faintly. "Yes, they're free." Kathy felt tears well up in her eyes, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over her. She knelt down, pulling Mia and Jack into a tight embrace. "We're safe now," she whispered. "We did it." As they made their way back downstairs, Kathy couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the shadow lurking in the corner. But the house was quiet, peaceful even. The oppressive presence that had haunted them for days was gone. The next morning, they packed up their belongings. They had made their decision. This house wasn't meant to be their home. As they drove away, Kathy looked back at the house one last time. It looked the same as it had when they first arrived, but she knew better now. This place had its secrets, and they had come too close to being consumed by them. As they turned the corner, leaving the house behind, Kathy whispered a quiet thank you to Greg, to the Smith family, and to whatever force had finally let them go. They were free now, and so was her family. And though they would never forget the terrifying experience, Kathy knew they had come out stronger on the other side. Together, Story 2, The Forgotten Hotel. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, a quiet escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. Alex and his best friend Jamie had planned a road trip through the remote countryside. They had heard about a picturesque little town, known for its beautiful scenery and quaint charm. But as they drove deeper into the night, the sky darkened and the weather took a turn for the worse. Rain lashed against their windshield, and the winding roads became harder to navigate. "We should find a place to stay for the night," Alex said, squinting at the road ahead. Jamie, who had been watching the GPS, nodded. There's supposed to be a small hotel just a few miles ahead. They pressed on, the rain falling harder with each passing minute. Eventually, they spotted a flickering neon sign through the downpour. It read, Briarwood Inn. The hotel looked old, very old. Its once grand facade was now weathered and cracked, and the surrounding area seemed desolate. The large oak trees that lined the property swayed ominously in the storm, their branches scratching at the windows like bony fingers. Despite its appearance, the Briarwood Inn seemed like their only option for shelter that night. As they pulled into the gravel parking lot, Alex and Jamie exchanged uneasy glances. "This place looks creepy," Jamie whispered, as they grabbed their bags and dashed through the rain toward the entrance. The lobby was dimly lit, and the air inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. A dusty chandelier hung from the ceiling, its light flickering occasionally. At the reception desk stood a tall, gaunt man, dressed in an old-fashioned suit. His eyes were cold, and his smile didn't reach them. "Welcome to the Briarwood Inn," the man said, his voice a slow drawl. "Do you need a room for the night?" Alex hesitated for a moment, but the rain outside was relentless. "Yes, please. Just for one night." The man nodded and handed them a key. "Room 204, up the stairs, to the left. Enjoy your stay." As they climbed the creaky staircase, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hallway was long and dimly lit, with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. It felt as though the hotel hadn't been touched in decades. When they finally reached their room, they were greeted by more signs of age: an old, dusty bed, creaking floorboards, and a single window with heavy, moth-eaten curtains. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling and rain pounding against the glass. Jamie threw her bag on the bed and sighed. "This place gives me the creeps," she said, looking around. "I can't believe we're staying here." Alex nodded. "Yeah, it's definitely weird. But let's just get through the night, and we'll leave first thing in the morning." As they settled in, the hotel's unsettling atmosphere continued to weigh on them. They tried to distract themselves by turning on the small, old television in the corner, but the static only added to the eerie feeling. After a while, they both decided to try and sleep, hoping that the storm would pass by morning. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Around midnight, Alex was jolted awake by a strange noise, like the sound of footsteps in the hallway. He sat up, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to stop right outside their door. "Jamie," he whispered, nudging her awake. "Do you hear that?" Jamie groggily opened her eyes and listened. The footsteps resumed, slow and deliberate, moving up and down the hallway. "Maybe it's just another guest," she whispered back, but her voice betrayed her unease. Alex quietly got out of bed and approached the door. He hesitated for a moment before looking through the peephole. His breath caught in his throat. There was no one there, but the footsteps continued. He quickly backed away from the door, his heart racing. "There's no one out there, but I can still hear it." Jamie's eyes widened, and she grabbed her phone to check the time. "It's after midnight," she said. "Let's just try to get through the night. We can leave as soon as the sun comes up." But as the night wore on, the strange noises didn't stop. Sometimes, it was a sound of whispering, low and unintelligible, echoing through the hallways. Other times, it was a soft knocking, first on the walls, then on the floorboards beneath their feet. The hours seemed to drag by, and neither Alex nor Jamie could sleep. They both lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the unsettling symphony of sounds that filled the hotel. Then, around 3 a.m., they heard it, a soft, eerie humming. It sounded like a lullaby, sweet but haunting. The tune floated through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. Alex and Jamie looked at each other, their faces pale. "Where is that coming from?" Jamie whispered, her voice trembling. Alex got out of bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He slowly approached the window and pulled back the curtain. The rain had slowed, and the moonlight illuminated the empty parking lot below. But something caught his eye. There, standing in the middle of the parking lot, was a figure, a woman, dressed in a long, tattered gown. Her hair was wild, and her head was tilted downward. The humming grew louder. "Jamie," Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "There's someone out there." Jamie rushed to the window and gasped. What is she doing out there in the middle of the night? They watched in silence as the woman stood motionless, humming the same eerie tune. Then, without warning, she slowly lifted her head, and even from the distance, they could see her eyes, hollow black and staring straight at them. The woman's empty, black eyes stared up at them from the parking lot, piercing through the darkness like two endless voids. Alex felt a chill crawl down his spine as the eerie humming filled the air. Without thinking, he stepped back from the window, his heart hammering in his chest. What do we do?" Jamie whispered, her voice barely audible, but laced with panic. She was frozen in place, her eyes locked on the strange figure outside. Alex didn't have an answer. He glanced around the room, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. But nothing made sense. The woman was just standing there, motionless, humming that eerie tune as if she belonged to another world entirely. "We need to get out of here," Alex finally said, grabbing his jacket from the chair. "This place isn't right." Jamie nodded quickly, grabbing her own things. They didn't care about leaving anything behind. They just wanted to escape the suffocating air of the Briarwood Inn. But as they approached the door, a loud, sharp knock echoed through the room. They froze. The knocking came again, louder this time, like someone pounding on the wood with desperate urgency. Alex's hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure if he should open it or not. Jamie took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "Who is it?" Alex called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just silence. Then, after a long pause, the knocking resumed. It was relentless now, as if whoever was on the other side of the door was trying to break it down. Alex's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he stepped away from the door, his heart racing. Suddenly, the door handle began to rattle violently, as if someone or something was trying to force their way inside. Jamie let out a soft whimper, backing further into the corner of the room. "We have to leave," she cried, her voice shaking. "We can't stay here." Alex nodded, but the panic had set in. His mind was racing, and the walls of the room seemed to be closing in on him. He grabbed the chair from the corner and shoved it under the doorknob, hoping it would buy them some time. But the pounding continued, growing louder and more aggressive by the second. "What do we do now?" Jamie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alex didn't have an answer. The room felt like a cage, and the sound of the relentless knocking seemed to echo off the walls, filling every inch of the space. He turned to the window, thinking maybe they could escape through it, but the thought of facing that strange woman outside sent another wave of fear crashing over him. "We're trapped," he muttered under his breath, feeling helpless. Just then, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, neither Alex nor Jamie moved, too afraid to make a sound. The air was thick with tension, and every second felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness. Jamie gasped, reaching out to grab Alex's arm. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. Alex fumbled for his phone, using its dim light to illuminate the room. The shadows danced on the walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air had grown colder, and the silence was oppressive. Suddenly, there was a soft creaking sound, like the groan of old wood under pressure. Alex pointed the light toward the door and saw something that made his blood run cold. The door was slowly opening, even though the chair was still wedged under the handle. The door was inching open, as if some invisible force was pushing it from the other side. Alex took a step back, pulling Jamie with him. His heart was pounding in his ears, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. "Stay behind me," he whispered, though he wasn't sure what good that would do. The door continued to creak open until there was a small gap. Alex held his breath, waiting for anything to happen. The darkness beyond the door was impenetrable, and the silence hung heavy in the air. Then, out of nowhere, a gust of freezing wind rushed into the room, extinguishing the light from Alex's phone. The cold seemed to wrap around them, sinking deep into their bones. Alex's hand trembled as he fumbled to turn the phone back on, but when the screen finally flickered to life, what he saw made his heart stop. Standing in the doorway was the woman from the parking lot. Her hollow, black eyes stared at them, unblinking. Her skin was pale and gaunt, her dress tattered and flowing in the invisible wind. But it was her smile, a slow, creeping grin that stretched across her face, that sent waves of terror through Alex. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. It was as if the room itself had become a vacuum, sucking the air out of his lungs. The woman took a slow step forward, her gaze locked onto him, her smile widening with each step. "Get out of here," Alex whispered to Jamie, his voice barely audible. But Jamie couldn't move either. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The woman stepped closer, her eerie humming filling the room once again. It was the same haunting melody they had heard earlier, but now it seemed to wrap around them, squeezing tighter with each note. Alex backed away until he was pressed against the wall. He tried to think of a way out, but his mind was blank. The woman was now only a few feet away, her hollow eyes boring into his soul. And then she spoke. In a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said, "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here." The woman whispered again, her voice sending chills down Alex's spine. "What do you mean?" Alex stammered, his heart racing as he tried to steady his breath. "Who are you?" She took another step closer, the air around them growing colder. "I was once like you," she said, her voice echoing with a haunting sadness. "I came here for a night of fun, just like you. But the Briarwood Inn is not what it seems. It hides secrets, and those who seek them rarely leave." "What secrets?" Jamie finally found her voice, trembling as she stepped forward, trying to comprehend the horror unfolding before them. The woman's eyes, dark and empty, seemed to look straight into Jamie's soul. "This place is cursed. It feeds on fear and despair. It traps those who enter, drawing them in with false promises of a good time. But once you're here, it doesn't let you go." Alex felt a wave of dread wash over him. "But why are you here? Are you trapped too?" The woman nodded slowly, tears welling up in her hollow eyes. "I am a prisoner of this place. I cannot leave. Not until I fulfill my purpose. I was sent to warn others, but the darkness is strong, and it clouds my mind. I forget what I need to say, Alex could feel the despair radiating from her, a sense of deep sadness that tugged at his heart. What do we need to do? How can we help you? Help me? The woman's lips curled into a sorrowful smile. You cannot help me, but you can help yourselves. You must leave this place before it consumes you. Do not let it take you like it did to me. As she spoke, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the room in a harsh glow. The woman's form shimmered, becoming almost translucent, and for a moment, Alex thought he could see the outlines of chains around her wrists, binding her to this cursed place. I can feel it, she continued, her voice shaking with emotion. It is watching you. It knows your fears and will use them against you. You must be strong. Just then, the temperature in the room dropped even further. Alex could see his breath misting in the air, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. He turned to Jamie, who looked terrified but determined. We can't stay here, she said, her voice trembling. We have to find a way out. But before they could move, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The walls seemed to close in, and Alex felt a wave of panic wash over him. No, he shouted, pounding on the door. Let us out. The woman raised her hands, her voice urgent. Listen to me. You have to confront your fears. This place will try to break you, but if you stay strong, you can escape. Do not let it control you. Suddenly, the humming intensified and the lights flickered violently. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for them. Alex turned back to the woman, feeling desperate. What do we do? Focus on each other, she instructed, her voice steady but urgent. Remember your bond. It is your greatest strength. With a deep breath, Alex grabbed Jamie's hand. They needed to rely on each other, to find strength in their friendship. We can do this together, he said firmly. The walls around them trembled, and the shadows seemed to recoil at their unity. The woman's face lit up with a glimmer of hope. Yes, hold on to each other. Do not let the darkness win. As they held hands, the shadows seemed to retreat, and the air began to clear. The door still wouldn't budge, but the fear that had gripped Alex started to loosen its hold. He could feel Jamie's grip tightening, and he knew they had to try harder. With all their strength, they pushed against the door together, chanting words of encouragement. We can do this. We are stronger together. They repeated the mantra, pouring their fear and determination into it. Slowly, the door began to tremble, and then with a loud creak, it swung open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The ghostly woman smiled, a hint of relief shining through her sadness. Go. You must leave this place, she urged, her voice echoing as if the very walls were urging them on. They stumbled into the hallway, breathing heavily, but knowing they had to keep moving. The walls seemed to shift and close in around them, but they pressed on, guided by the faint light ahead. The air felt thick, and Alex could sense something lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. He glanced back to see the woman standing in the doorway, her figure fading into the darkness. Thank you, she whispered, her voice a mere echo. Remember what you've learned. What will happen to you? Jamie called out, desperation in her voice. Do not worry about me, she replied, her figure growing dimmer. Just live. With those final words, the woman vanished into the shadows, leaving Alex and Jamie alone in the dark hallway. They could hear faint whispers, like 1,000 voices converging into one. We can't stop, Alex urged, his heart racing. We have to get out. As they ran, the whispers grew louder, echoing in their ears. The shadows danced around them, but they pushed through, holding on to each other. They could feel the cold breath of the darkness behind them, but they refused to give in. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a staircase leading down to the ground floor. "This way," Jamie shouted, pulling Alex along. They descended the stairs two at a time, feeling the weight of fear lifting as they moved further from the room. But just as they reached the bottom, a loud crash echoed through the hallway, and the lights flickered again. The darkness roared around them, trying to pull them back into its clutches. "No!" Alex shouted, gripping Jamie's hand tightly. "We won't go back." Together, they charged forward, fueled by determination. As they reached the exit, they could feel the air change. The oppressive weight of fear began to lift, and the darkness seemed to recede. With one final push, they burst through the doors into the cool night air, gasping for breath as they stepped outside. The moonlight bathed them in a soft glow, and for the first time, they felt free. But as they turned back to look at the Briarwood Inn, they could see the shadows swirling around the windows, and the whispers began to fade into silence. They had escaped, but they knew the darkness would always be waiting for those who dared to enter.